This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. At an early age, Steve Knowlton knew he would run across America. He completed his first marathon at age 13. Since then, he has completed 45 additional marathons and 7 ultramarathons. He completed his cross-country run in 2010 when he ran from Seattle, Washington to Key Largo, Florida, a 3,717-mile run in 100 days to raise awareness for Chrohn's disease. In 2013, Steve set off on a second cross-country run, attempting to break the world speed record by running from San Francisco to New York City in 45 days to raise awareness for Asperger syndrome. Steve Knowlton, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Steve, how did you get into long-distance running?
Well, it happened at an early age. Back in the mid-'70s, I had a football coach that used to run all the time up and down our road, and he would always egg my dad on to come out running with him. And my dad would have a cigarette or a beer, and he'd keep putting it off. And then one day, he went out running with him. He'd run like a couple blocks and then walk. And pretty soon, within a month, he was running up to 4 miles. And I was pretty impressionable, so I started running with him. And I'm very competitive, and I knew I could do a lot better, so I just kept at it. Another incident happened about the same time. I had gotten in a fight on the bus, and I was kicked off the bus and didn't want to tell my parents. And so I would run to school every day as a 6th grader, which was about 3 miles, and then I would run home. And about 2 weeks later, the bus driver let me ride the bus again, but it got me interested in long-distance running. It was something new, and it was different. It was something that a lot of people weren't doing at the time.
Do you remember anything about your first marathon?
Yes, my dad ran one when I was 12 years old, and I was just totally amazed that somebody could run that far. And so I signed up for a Grandma's Marathon up in Duluth. And I just remember it was so exciting when we got up there because Duluth and Lake Superior was like being on the ocean. And I met a football star, Alan Page, and also Dick Beardsley, happened to be staying in the same hotel. So that was pretty exciting for me. And at the time, it was 1979. I was a 13-year-old, and I was the second youngest one to enter the marathon. The younger kid, who was 11, I stayed with him till the halfway point, and then he dropped out. But we had gone out way too fast. And so by the halfway point, I was pretty tired, and my dad kept telling me to call it a day and take the van back to the finish line. But I was pretty stubborn, and I hung in there, and he stayed with me, and I ended up finishing in a little over 5 hours.
Wow, not bad.
So I was pretty excited that I was able to complete a 26-mile marathon at the age of 13. And it stuck with me throughout my life. Anything that's really tough, you just hang in there long enough and you can get through it.
Now, Steve, out of your other marathons or ultra marathons, are there any moments that stand out for you? Do you have a proudest moment?
Well, it's a little different moment. I had a friend of mine whose son, who was 15 years old, back in 2009, wanted to complete a marathon, and so we ended up going up to Duluth, and he was in a lot better shape than me. He was in track at the time, but I figured I'd do about a 3:45. He might do a 3:30 or less. And that year, it was 93 degrees during the heat of the day, and he ended up having a rough time, but I stayed with him. And we ended up finishing like 5.5 hours. But what was inspired me was the fact that I wasn't tired at all. And that's what led into me doing a lot more ultra marathons and then getting the idea to run across America for the first time. Right afterwards, we ended up going to Gooseberry Farms and hiking around there. And then then the next day we went to Split Rock and hiked up and down that, and I thought, wow, that's pretty good, because most marathons you're pretty tired for a few days afterwards at least.
So when you got this initial thought in your head, like, hey, maybe I can do a run across the country, what are the things that occurred along the way that finally made that happen?
Well, I in the fall of 2009, I had met a gentleman who was selling books at our local farmer's market on Saturday morning, and he had run from St. Paul to Atlanta over 2,000 miles, and he had done that in 1996, and he was selling his book at the farmer's market. His name was Terry Hitchcock. And so I bought his book, and I read it in 2 nights. And right after I read it, I said, I got to do that. I have to run across America. And so I started looking at some of the people that had done it before. And I thought, well, I'll do something unique. I'll run from Seattle to Key Largo, Florida. I really didn't have a game plan as far as all the roads I was going to take, but I just knew that I had to raise money and get the ball rolling. And Karen Levin did an interview with me in mid-June of 2010, and I already had a website. And after that got on the news, it really took off, and people started showing interest in donating. And I was also running for Chrohn's disease, which I've had since the age of 17. And I thought that would be a great cause to promote during my run, which I did. So it was a little nerve-wracking. I got to Seattle, Washington about 3 a.m. their time because my flight was delayed. And so I had to hang out in the airport till 5 a.m. I took the subway into Seattle from Tacoma, and I had no place to stay. I ended up walking around and found a hostel, and pretty much that's how the run started. Is as far as I stayed in the hostel. I got full of the news stations, and the next morning I didn't sleep too well, but the next morning I was all set to go, and I was going to go to my first stop was going to be North Bend. So that was very exciting. When I was off the flight, I remember reading the newspaper and reading about a bear attack at a campsite, and so I was a little taken back. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I'd never been to the state of Washington, so I knew I had a little bit of an adventure ahead of me.
Now, you're doing this completely unsupported. Is that true?
Yes, I started out with a Coleman backpack, and I had a couple gallons of water, and then all my clothing, socks, and necessities, snack bars and food. And once I got going, I looked like Santa Claus because I had so much stuff in my backpack. It must have weighed over 60 pounds. And by the time I got about 3 miles down the road, I started unloading a bunch of the things that I figured, I got rid of one of the gallons and I lightened up a little bit. And then the first night at the hotel, I got rid of a lot more clothing and just was down to the bare minimum. And I ran with that backpack for 5 days all the way to Yakima Canyon, which by that time the backpack had kind of worn away at my sides. It had really caused a lot of pain in my shoulders, and then my shins were really starting to take a beating from all the weight. And that's when I figured I better get a stroller. And I ended up getting one at Target, which worked out really good because the backpack fit right in it. And I just converted it, so I strapped it in with some bungee cords, and I pretty much adapted the whole way down as I went. Right away, within the first 14 miles, I ended up, from Yakima, I got on the major highway, or interstate. Didn't really check to see if I could run on interstates, and I found out right away from the state patrol I couldn't. So he ended up packing my stuff up in the trunk and drove me back about 4 miles to the previous intersection and got me on the old highway, and that's what I ended up running through the whole state of Washington. And then ended up going from Prosser into Umatilla, Oregon, which is 47-mile run that day. And that was pretty exciting to get the first state under my belt. And after I got through that, I was pretty confident I could make it the rest of the way. You know, I felt like my body had started getting attuned to the long distances. And what I did is I learned to just take everything one day at a time and not look at the whole, United States. I made a point of not looking at the atlas as far as how far I had left to go. I would just look at the next town, and roughly they were about 40 miles apart. And I just thought, okay, I just have to get to this town, and then I can relax and get ready for the next day. And one thing about going solo is you don't have a crew to help you out. When you get to the town, a lot of times I had to go at least 2 to 3 more miles to a hotel and then find a grocery store to replenish all my items and then also get dinner. And what I do each night is just unpack everything and reorganize and then throw all the trash away. And so I really didn't get to bed till about 10 o'clock every night. And I ended up doing a journal every night, too. I would write a page because I figured one day I'd like to, look back at it and possibly write a book about my experience.
This was a paper journal?
I had a little diary, and I just would date it. I would log all the miles I ran each day, and then I would write down important things that happened during the day. Like the first week was pretty chaotic. I remember just getting out of Seattle, I was running through some trails, and the trail would end, and I had to climb over a 10-foot fence, chain link fence, to get toward the highway because I could hear it off in the distance. Another day, like day 4, I had ran out of water, and I went down by the river. I had to cross over a bunch of rocks to get down the river to cool off, and didn't realize it, but I heard a lot of noise, and then I realized it was a bunch of rattlesnakes in the rocks.
Wow.
So that was a little scary getting back out of there, but kind of learned my lesson.
Steve, is anybody handling any media for you? So do you have somebody back at home that's calling the media stations?
Yeah, my mom and dad were very helpful. My mom would call the different news stations or newspapers in the towns along the way. And then my dad started doing all the navigating. And if my mom couldn't find a hotel for me to stay in, my dad would find places where I could camp, or a lot of times a church, a pastor would let me stay at his house, or a congregation member would let me stay. And they were very accommodating. They just felt like one of the family. Would usually stay up till about 10 with them, and we had dinner, and it was a really nice. Those nights were really memorable because it felt like I was grounded again. Most of the time I would be in a hotel and it was just me, and all I had was my phone, so I'd call my girlfriend at the time and call my parents and let them know I'm safe. But for the most part, it was just me, and there were a lot of moments where you're out on the interstate or the highway and there's mountain lions or wolves and coyotes out there, and when it's just you, it's kind of a scary feeling, but it made me very strong. Kind of reminded me of that movie Call of the Wild, where that kid dropped everything and just decided to travel around the country, and then eventually ended up in Alaska.
Oh, Into the Wild.
Yeah, Into the Wild, yep. So it kind of reminded me of that. I mean, as I was going too, I started out at about 185, and then by, I'd say the second or third week, I was down to about 170. I stayed about that weight for a long time. And then eventually by the end, I ended up, I think I was 160 at the end of the run.
Now, you mentioned law enforcement once already, but I read that you got stopped like over 30 times by law enforcement. I wonder why that was and how did you handle it?
Well, what it was is my backpack, it was full, and so it looked like it was black also, so it matched the stroller. And it looked like I was actually pushing, like there might have been somebody in the stroller, a little kid. And I think people driving down the interstate thought that I was pushing a little kid. And so right away, I'd see them, pull their phone out. And my dad even was told when he was looking for campsites, talking to the State Patrol, they told him the dispatchers were getting incredible amounts of calls about me. And so it would be at least once a day, if not twice. A few times I was pulled over, 3 times. And eventually, as I got further south, I think I was in Missouri, I ended up buying a sign, a blank white sign. I just flipped over a for sale sign and put the letters Key Largo on it. And so that slowed down the process because people could see that they could see a sign on there. And then I ended up putting an American flag on the top. And so after I put both those items on, I was pulled over probably once or twice every other day, but it really slowed down after that. And I also asked the law enforcement if they could tell other law enforcement along the way that I was headed that way. But a lot of times I would, they'd either stop me and run everything right on the spot, or they'd have me sit in the back of the squad car, and it would take about 20 minutes. Toward the end, I was getting very frustrated because 20 minutes or a half an hour just means I'm going to get done that much later, and plus I stiffen up during that time. And I remember telling the officer one time, I said, if I had escaped or if I was on the run from the law, do you think I'd draw this much attention to myself running down the interstate with a stroller? And they got a kick out of that.
So how were the people that you ran into along the way?
Oh, they were incredible. The first couple that really helped me out was in Mecum, and they ended up letting me stay in they were refurbishing a hotel. And then in Idaho, I just remember in Pocatello, I was going down the interstate, and a lady just stopped, grabbed into her console, and just handed me a ton of change. It must have been about $15. And I don't know if she thought I was homeless or maybe I didn't shave that day, but pretty soon as I was going further south, people would stop and just hand me a $20 or $30. And I think word was getting out of what I was pursuing, and they were just supporting me. And so it was a great feeling. It was quite an adventure. And I remember in Mississippi, a lady pulled over with 3 kids in her car, and she was halfway on the interstate. And I just remember being so worried about her because cars were flying up behind her and then going into the other lane. And she passed 20 and a 10 back to her kid and handed it to me. And they didn't look like they were driving the best car or had the means to do something like that. So it was quite a feeling of, the further south I got, the more giving people were. And I was just totally surprised. In Arkansas, a lady had pulled over, and she gave me a bag lunch, gave me $20, and she gave me her business card. And the funny thing is when I got to the hotel that night, I called her and thanked her. And I told her what I was doing, and she goes, "Oh, I thought you were homeless." And so that was kind of interesting. And she ended up having friends along the way as far as Alabama that would come out and help me. It was pretty amazing the amount of support just through. She had a network of friends that just helped me along the way, and it felt like, okay, if I get in a bind, at least I have some phone numbers I can call people, which started making me feel a little more safe. But I did have a few incidences. I know one time by Soda Springs, Idaho, a wolf came out on the road. It must have weighed at least 200 pounds, and it kind of stared me down. And at first, it was about 5:30 in the morning, and I first looked at it. It was kind of exhilarating. But then I thought about it. He's probably not alone, and there wasn't many cars going by on the highway. And so that was pretty scary, and it ended up running off. But I just thought, if there was a pack of wolves out there, all I had was a knife and a bear mace. So, hopefully by the grace of God, somebody would stop and help me. Another incident in Florida, just past Lamont, a couple of thugs did a 180 and started following me in the ditch in one of those souped-up trucks, the kind that you see at the truck shows. And you could tell they'd been drinking, and they followed me for probably about a mile. And it started getting kind of uncomfortable, and that's when I pulled out my cell phone, and I actually just called my dad. But as soon as they saw the cell phone, they just turned around and left. And but there was a lot of vulnerable times during the run, but I had mentally gotten tough, and I knew I could handle myself. I think about it when I got done. I thought, by the grace of God, I made it unharmed. My body wasn't super beat up by the end of the run. I could have kept going, and when I got into Florida, that's when I started kind of getting into a depression because I knew it was coming to an end. I enjoyed it so much I didn't want it to stop.
I saw in your photos you were wearing headphones. I was wondering.
I listened to music. I had an MP3 player. And so sometimes I would listen to my MP3 player and listen to U2, Johnny Cash, a lot of 80s tunes that I had pre-recorded. Also, I would listen to a sermon like by Joel Osteen, or just listen to the radio to change things up. One thing that was different about this run than the run I did just last month was when I was out on the interstate, there were long spans of time that I just kind of tuned out. I would just literally go into a dream state. All of a sudden, 7 miles would go by, and I wouldn't even realize I had gone that far. And with this other run, I was constantly in the moment because I had a crew with me, and they were usually only about 2 miles ahead of me. So I was always kind of awake and alert, and didn't really have a chance to zone out, so to speak.
So the other run started in 2013, is that correct?
Yeah, I started May 18th, just a month and a half ago. And I started in San Francisco because there's only 2 spots that I've heard of that they will consider for the world record, and that's San Francisco or Los Angeles at the City Hall, and then you run to New York City to their Manhattan City Hall. And so I started on May 18th. We got going a little after 6 in the morning, and I felt really good that day. We didn't really have a game plan. I was supposed to go across the Bay Bridge, but that had fallen through 2 days before, so we ended up having to go through a lot of the little cities north of San Francisco where I was going up and down huge hills that would go up about 3 miles and then back down. I finally got to 101, which I wasn't allowed to run on, so I had to run on a railroad track parallel to it, and then I finally got to 37. I was feeling pretty good, and I got to Fairfield probably about 10:30 at night, and I had done 66 miles that day and felt really confident that things were going to really go well. But the next day is when the heat started going up, and it was about 95 the next day. One of the problems I had was I have Chrohn's disease, and some of the crew didn't realize I'm not supposed to have much dairy. And I was given a lot of protein, which had dairy in it, muscle milk, and other food items, and it irritated my digestive system, and I had problems there from there on. But another issue I had too was on the third day I started up the Sierra Nevada, which goes up about over probably 60 miles. You go from about 500 feet to 8,500 and some feet to Carson Pass. And that was a grueling, that went into the fourth day, and that took a lot out of me. And after that, there was a mountain, at least one mountain I had to go up about every day, running on 50 through Nevada. And in my training in Minnesota here, our weather we had a rough winter. In the spring, it ranged from 30 to 60, but mostly in the 40s. So when I got to California, in Nevada, I wasn't acclimated with the heat. I'd also been given shoes from Brooks, running shoes, and they were half size too small. I had some foot problems right off the bat and ended up having blisters, and we weren't able to get new shoes till Carson City. So I was pretty much running on willpower, which kept getting tougher every day.
Well, it's obviously a tough run. The record stood since 1980. Yeah,
I have a profound respect for Frank Giannino. What he did was incredible. I had heard that he had averaged about 50 miles a day until he got to Fort Collins, Nebraska. During my run, I was still close to 50 miles a day till I reached Skull Rock Pass in Utah. And that's when I started, it was a very hot day on that day, and I ended up having kind of a dizzy spells and was kind of drifting to the left. And on the 11th day, which was 4 days prior, I had gone to a clinic in Eureka, Nevada, and they saw that my electrolytes were way out of balance and that I was retaining a lot of fluid. I had actually gained 20 pounds during the run, and they wanted to rush me by ambulance to the ER in Elko, and I ended up refusing that. We had almost come to the decision that night that I was going to stop the run, but I had a lot of Pedialyte the night before and got my electrolytes pretty good. And by the next day, I just couldn't quit. I just said, I can't stop this soon, and I got to give it a better chance than this. So I ended up running 4 more days and was going close to 50 miles a day. I did over 50 miles on the last day, but in the morning of the last day, I had reached Utah, and when I got to the RV for my second stop, that's when I started kind of drifting off to the left, and then I thought, this is different. This isn't good. I thought, well, maybe I'm having a stroke or something isn't going good here, and it's not worth dying for. So that I just kind of ran out about a 12 to 15-minute mile for the whole day, and it really weighed on me. And I thought, as I was coming in about 8 o'clock that night for a stop, that's when I started drifting off to the left. One thing that worried me is there's a lot of rattlesnakes in the ditches, and they come out at night. And so you have to be very alert. You have to have your wits about you, and I just felt like I was kind of losing it. And so that's when we talked it over, and that's when I decided to stop the run on June 1st.
So besides the crew, which gave you some incorrect stuff that you were eating, I mean, did you enjoy having the crew with you? Was it better than being solo?
Yeah. The toughest part is I would try to get going by 5:30 in the morning. So as soon as I got in around midnight every night, my other crew member, Mike, and my dad would help me get my feet cleaned up. But our shower didn't have hot water, so I wouldn't even bother taking a shower. A couple nights we were able to stay at a RV park, and I could shower. But I remember, I think it was the 6th day, I decided I was going to start running at night because it was so hot during the day. And I tried to go to bed during the day from noon till 5, and I couldn't sleep. So I got up and my dad was a crew member, and we ended up playing cards for about an hour, and then I ended up going back to bed, but really didn't sleep much during the whole run because I was in a lot of pain, and it's really hard to sleep when you're in excruciating pain, and it was almost like an anxious feeling too, that I was falling behind on how many miles I wanted to run every day. And so I believe it was one day in particular, I ended up running 26 miles to Fallon in the morning, and then took a 4-hour nap, and then I ended up running another 50, close to 50, through the night into the next day. So that was one of the points where I thought, okay, I'm coming back now. I put in like 72 miles, and so that was a good day. But after that, the next day we had problems. We were running at night, and we had a lot of coyotes come out, and I don't know if they thought I'd make a good lunch, but that was a little nerve-wracking. And then my one of my crew members, he had been up all night the night before driving, and my dad had already gone to bed, so it was about 2 in the morning. He said, I just cannot stay up. So we ended up calling it a night, and I only had 23 miles in that night, so that put me back about 27 miles. So I was always kind of playing catch-up, which is hard to do when you're trying to average over 65 miles a day.
There was someone there with you that was doing a documentary that I read. Do you know what's going to happen to that film?
Well, Mike Child, the other crew member, also had professional cameras for doing video and taking professional pictures. And him and Denny Van Gilder, who actually has a production company out of Mankato, are going to start working on a documentary. And also they want to include my first run, somehow get that in there, because I do have some footage, news footage, and also I took footage just from my phone at the time. But also they wanted to interview Marshall Ulrich, who has the Masters record. He lives in Colorado, but his wife is from Winona, Minnesota. So he comes up here frequently. So one of these times we're going to get together and meet with him, and then hopefully he can get an interview in. And then the main big one, too, would also be Frank Giannino out of New York, who has the world record. Another thing, too, is I plan on running this again by next spring. I'm already running again, and I'm feeling a lot better. You know, I'm going to give it another shot at this because it's hard for me to live with knowing that I didn't have my best effort out there. I mean, I put a lot of effort into it, but I know I could do a lot better if I was healthy, and I would really recommend that for anybody trying this or just running across America, to have their diet regimented and don't stray off of it, because it's very important. And then also be acclimated to the heat too. Sometime, at least by the wintertime, I'll go down south, East Colorado, and in Nevada. I have relatives in Arizona, and start training in the desert and especially the mountains. If I had to do it all over again, I would train on nothing but mountains, because running on the flat ground, that's easy for anybody, but going up and down a mountain every day, it's like setting your treadmill on the highest pitch, and then adding a couple phone books to it and running for 10 miles. And then it's just as hard going back down because you're constantly putting on the brakes, and it's real tough on the shins.
All right, well, I'm glad to hear you're going to give it another shot.
Yep, I should, and I'd probably leave earlier, too. I'd probably leave late April, late enough where the highways won't be closed up in the mountains due to snow, but early enough so that I'm not running in the 100-degree weather out in the desert.
I just wanted to ask you about the certificate of recognition that you got from the U.S. Congress, Star of the North. What can you tell me about that?
Oh, that was pretty exciting. That was back in the spring of 2011. I had received a letter from John Klein in the House of Representatives, and they wanted to recognize my achievement of running across America for Crohn's disease and bringing attention to it. And so that was taking place in Lakeville. There were other recipients also, and it was quite the honor. It was very nice to meet John Klein and get the award, and I'll never forget that day. It was quite an honor, and I respect him very much, and hopefully the next time I run across America, I can do a lot more help for autism and Asperger's. I have loved ones with it, and I know that there's help for younger kids and adults, up until about the age of 18. But after that, they're kind of left on their own, and it's very hard for them and their families to adjust after school. And so I'd like to bring more awareness to that, and also help society as a whole to include people with Asperger's and autism instead of, they tend to be excluded from what I see. Hopefully next time I will set the record, and we can raise a lot of awareness and funding to help these people.
Okay, well, good luck. Steve, I know you've already mentioned some of this, but I always ask this question at the end anyway. What's next for you?
Oh, I'm sure I'll do some ultra marathons. I'm taking a break as far as the long runs right now. My goal was to set the record by July 1st, and then my next goal was to qualify again for Boston Marathon. And then after that, my goal was to do the Ironman, to qualify for that. So I'll just do one thing at a time. I'm not done with the attempt at the world record, so that's still top on my priority list, along with working, but that's the main thing on my mind right now. It's not done yet, and it's just, one thing I have to just is I have to keep my attitude good and acceptance that, this wasn't my time this time, but I'll have another shot at it, and to just keep a positive attitude and know that I didn't, I gave it my best effort, but I know I can do better.
Steve, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, my website is steverun.com or steveknowlton.com. My email address is Steve D. Knowlton, that's KNOWLTON, at hotmail.com. If you just Google Steve Knowlton Run News, a lot of times you can find different sites on me, so there's always a contact spot on the web pages, so it's pretty easy to find me on Google. Okay,
Steve Knowlton, thank you very much for talking to me today. Congratulations on your accomplishments, and good luck the next time you do this record run.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was an honor to be on your show.
Recorded June 26, 2013. Listen to more great podcasts at thepursuitzone.com.